Well, for the latest of Footy on 9 season previews today, it's the Western Bulldogs, and I'm joined by Nathan Brown. Brownie, a season of renewed expectation for the Dogs.
Certainly is. There's a lot of hype around the Western Bulldogs this year. They've added a couple of nice players to their roster, or their list as we call it here in Australia. But does the hype serve up what they need to get? Not sure at the moment. I think they're going to go okay, the Dogs, but they've got to start the year well.
Well, let's take a look at their inclusions. It was a pretty handy trade period. They got in, I guess, their needs. They lost Dale Morris, but they got in a ready-made replacement.
Yeah, it's disappointing that Dale Morris won't be playing, but he hasn't played for a few years, so they don't really lose anything from probably the last 12 or 18 months, and they bring in Keith in the back end, who was probably Adelaide's best defender last year, and obviously Josh Bruce, and we'll go into that a bit later, but really good inclusions at either end which they needed.
In terms of their draftees, Cody Waitman, who was a first-round draft pick, and he adds to that small forward arsenal, I suppose.
Yeah, they certainly do, and they probably need some good small forwards rolling through there. I mean, they've got Lloyd, who's very good, but is he a small forward or is he a marking target? So he might find a spot. He might play some games, Waitman.
Well, in terms of that forward line you touched on, Josh Bruce, they've already got Aaron Norton, who's proved to be a young star, and also Josh Shackey. So how do they all fit in together, do you think?
Well, that's the big key. Can they all fit in together? Three tall forwards, and you'd think Shackey and Bruce aren't the quickest players. But what I do love about Josh Bruce, and I think he's a great inclusion, he's a player that can kick 4, 5, 6 goals in any one game, but he's also a player that can play a role. He can jet up towards the centre wing, he can create space behind him, he's the ultimate team man. Which leads me to think that Norton is going to have a big year with Josh Bruce in that forward line. So I think Bruce and Norton working really well together. Like, Norton's a freak. He's going to be a superstar, but he still needs a workhorse like Josh Bruce. He'll leave nothing in the tank, Josh Bruce. I reckon it's one of the handiest pickups any side has, and I think they can kick enough goals, which has been a little bit of their issue, but they do need those small forwards like Lloyd, who played well last year. I think he kicked 46 goals last year, Lloyd, which is a handy return, but certainly the Bruce-Norton combination for me is a ripper.
So in terms of their defence too, it's an interesting one. You touched on Alex Keith and what he brings. They've had a few guys like your Trengoves or your Lewis Youngs who haven't always cemented their spot there.
Well, this is where the Bulldogs are either going to be really good or they're going to fall away, because this is their Achilles heel, their defensive end. If they can get that right, and I like the inclusion of Keith. I think he's a very good player. He was probably Adelaide's best defender last year in a pretty ordinary season. But when you look back at when they got beaten, and they got beaten poorly last year, Jack Darling kicked a 6, Charlie Curnow kicked a 7. The other time they played Carlton, Kaz Bolt, they kicked 7 between them, the two tall forwards down there that day. I just worry that their tall forwards sometimes are going to get a hold of them. So that's why Alex Keith's in there. If they can hold those tall forwards, they'll be okay. But I still think that's the problem for the Dogs.
Is that going to hold them back from top 4? Because it seems like most people, or a lot of people anyway, have got them pushing that top 4 again.
It is, because I think the best clubs who are going to finish in that top 4, like your Richmonds and your West Coast, these guys have got genuine big tall forwards. Rewalt and also Tom Lynch. You've got Darling and Kennedy. These guys can kick big scores, so that's going to be the thing that holds them back. If they can do a number on them and they can really hold those tall forwards, they're going to be a real strength, the Dogs.
I guess so much of that is about controlling the supply through the midfield, and they do have a very strong midfield. Your Bontempelli, Jack McRae, Josh Dunkley and these types. Does it allow Bontempelli a bit more freedom, do you think? One
of the strongest midfields in the comp, and you look at that, Dunkley, what a performance that was last year, to go from a tagger to somebody who can get the ball 35, 40 times, and he also kicked goals. And then you got Jack McRae, who 3 or 4 years ago didn't man up a lot, wasn't a great skill expert, but now you have a look at Jack McRae, the #1 goal assist player at the Western Bulldogs, and that allows Bontempelli to play half forward, full forward, and then roll through the midfield. You got Lockie Hunter, Lipinski to roll through there. That is a really strong midfield, and to be able to have Bont not playing there 100% of the time, I think is a great asset.
Well, let's get on to your predictions. This is the hard stuff, Brownie. We're going to put you to the test here. Who's the pressure on this year the most at the Dogs?
I think Shackey. I think with the inclusion of Josh Bruce and Norton developing, I think Shackey is the one that might get left out. Look, he's a raw talent, but can he, week after week, game after game, serve up what he needs to? Sometimes, for me, it's only my point of view, he might be a great runner, but he looks a little bit lazy. If he can get through that part and he can start impacting games more, maybe he'll become a better player, but for me, he's the one under pressure.
We'll keep an eye on Josh Shackey. Next, who's your big improver?
I like Tim English. I like the big ruckman. I've got two, Tim English and young Lipinski. I think the end of the year, last year, Lipinski was brilliant. He started to get the ball many times through that midfield, and he's one of those players that will link up in there. He's a good runner, and he can kick goals. And then Tim English, he's put on some size, he's fitter, he got pushed around a fair bit last year. The Brodie Grundy game was a highlight of that, but I think Tim English this year will make a bigger stride, but I think the year after that, Tim English will explode.
In terms of where they finish, this is interesting now because there's so many teams that want to be up there and that are pushing, that are on the improve. But where do you see the Dogs?
I think they finish 5th, 6th or 7th, around that area. I can't see them finishing top 4, but I definitely have them playing finals.
Well, Brownie, thanks for your time. We'll keep an eye on the Bulldogs this year. Brownie doesn't have them in the top 4, so certainly very interesting. That's our latest Footy on 9 preview.